Utopia, and I was setting up the Google Hangout for our receiver rankings. So that's why I was a little tardy, but we're going to dive straight into the rankings here because time is money here at the Utopia of Sports. We're going to start with the receivers because there's 3 guys I see as first rounders, 3 receivers that I think could be game changers in this draft class. I'm going to make a case for why each one's number 1, and I'm going to let Joey reveal his verdict at the end. And we'll start with N'Keal Harry because this is a guy that 6'4", 215. He catches the football like Odell Beckham Jr. on tape, but he's got Randy Moss's body. He doesn't have the route tree that the other 2 receivers, Dylan Mitchell and Anthony Johnson, have, yet he has the highest ceiling because if you can catch the ball like Odell Beckham and you have a big body like Randy Moss, you can run a 4.3 740. You can pick apart NFL corners on tape like Iman Marshall, a USC guy who's not really that good. You dominate the red zone. You can use a jab step or a fade with your first step. That makes you really gifted as a wide receiver. And you look at teams like the Bills, the Jaguars, the Packers, the Dolphins, even the Colts, maybe even the Jets in the top 5. You look at all those teams as potential landing spots for N'Keal Harry, and this is a guy who has no threats. He's one of the safer receivers in this class, and as far as upside goes, he's not as polished as A.J. Green or Julio Jones was, but he's my highest graded receiver since those 2 in the 2011 NFL draft. And that says a lot. I was a huge fan of Alshon Jeffery coming out of the 2012 class when I first started, but I was naive back then. And this is my highest graded receiver since A.J. Green or Julio Jones, which says a lot. At the same time, you can make an argument that his route tree and the fact that that route tree, only 6 routes, that makes him a boomer bust player. And then the next 2 guys are Dylan Mitchell out of Oregon. He had 100-yard games versus Cameron Bynum, and then another 100-yard game versus Byron Murphy, who limited Harry to 20 yards. 8 receptions, 119 yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and an overtime win. And Harry struggled versus Byron Murphy. Mitchell dominated him, but Mitchell has been inconsistent at times. 6'2", 189, 69 receptions, 1,000 receiving yards, 9 touchdowns. He did well versus Bynum and Murphy, but that's sort of it. And he's got the speed. He can run a good 40 time. His route running is amazing. He can run up to 14 different routes. He's a better route runner than Harry, but his route tree also needs to improve. While it's proficient, it's not at the level Anthony Johnson's route tree is. And while Anthony Johnson may not have the upside the other receivers have, I would certainly argue out of the 3 in this class, he is the safest of the 3 to draft at the moment because you've seen what he can do on tape for 2 years in a row. And as long as he shows that 30 different routes in the Senior Bowl, as long as he can run the 4.4 240 time that Tony Mario thought he could run, I mean, Jane Bluler and Charlie Campbell think he's going to run a 4.5, but if he runs a 4.4 and our intel's correct, it means Anthony Johnson's the first rounder. So, and even when his numbers drop, he's unselfish in terms of attitude, like Larry Fitzgerald. Like, this is the most unselfish receiver I've seen on tape since Larry Fitzgerald, and that does say a lot. He's got 4.4 speed. He can run 30 different routes. The weakness with him that he's still raw. His games are all over the place, but he just won't drop as many passes as Buffalo teammates. And I look at Baltimore, Oakland, the Colts, even a team like the Patriots or the Packers in the late first round. With Josh Gordon and Edelman under contract next year, the Patriots probably won't take a receiver in the first round. But you look at the Packers, these are the top 3 receivers in this class, and they're all guys with 95 or higher grades on my board out of 99. I like these receivers much better than everyone else in last year's draft. But at the same time, who's going to declare? Harry's going to declare. We don't know Dylan Mitchell's status yet. So if Mitchell goes back to school, this is basically a 2-horse race between N'Keal Harry and Anthony Johnson. So, but I think these are the 3 guys that separate themselves from the pack, head and shoulders. And I think you agree with me at that point. But after assessing all these 3 receivers, what's your verdict?
I guess out of those 3, Harry stands out as the number 1 receiver. He isn't a great overall receiver by any stretch. I think you did a good job with your comparison to Randy Moss. Randy Moss was a one-trick pony. Never got out of it. He was a speed receiver. Get your butt downfield. catch a deep pass. That's what he was. That's what Harry is. Get your butt downfield, catch a pass. Go strong pass, go wide pass catch radius. That's great. Makes it better so people can just throw it up. You're still going to go get it. But the thing is, Randy Moss was a one-trick pony. But buddy, there was nobody in NFL history better at that trick. And he made mind-blowing plays because there was nobody better at that trick. Harry is a Randy Moss type player. If you need a deep threat, you're not going to find a better one in this draft. Because he'll get his butt downfield and he'll catch the ball.
Yeah, he catches the ball like Odell Beckham with his one-handed catches, but he plays like Randy Moss. Speed is Moss. His body is Moss. He's got Moss written all over him.
Well, at the same token, though,
his character's much higher, too.
That does bring a little bit of a dilemma, is that if you're a team that doesn't need a downfield threat, you're not going to take Harry because he's not going to go over the middle. He's not going to run all these different routes.
Harry's better fit for a vertical offense. Like a team that runs a vertical offense is the best fit for him as far as scheme goes. And
yeah, he'd be better. He'd be better with a team like the Rams or the Browns who do need a downfield threat.
If the Jaguars got this guy and they ignore quarterback in the first round, it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be Justin Blackmon all over again. If the Bills get him, he could be Josh Allen's #1 guy. If the Packers get him and they use him as a deep threat spontaneously to replace Randall Cobb and they still make Adams the feature guy and they ease him in, that can work like gangbusters. And Aaron Rodgers will be back before you know it.
Yeah, also don't count out Carolina. Cam's got a huge arm. You love that downfield.
I think the Colts are a good fit as well because Andrew Luck wants to use the vertical offense, but he also knows how to integrate the short passing offense. And with a cerebral communicator like Luck, Luck can improve Harry's route tree.
At least he can try. We've seen people who have never really run routes before come into the NFL, tried to learn, and it's not a quick process.
It's not, but I feel like Luck's one quarterback who's assertive and authoritative enough to get through to Harry. Like, I don't think Tannehill would have that type of influence on Harry, even though I think the Dolphins could make it work with him. So as far as the teams, you look at the Bills, the Jaguars, the Packers, the Dolphins, and the Colts. I think the Bills, the Packers, and the Colts would be the best scheme fits of those three teams. So, because Josh Allen's a vertical quarterback. He loves to air it deep, and you put a deep threat like Harry with Josh Allen will get better because he has a receiver like that. Because Josh Allen's type of play as a quarterback complements Harry's type of play at receiver. Like, their skill sets go hand in hand, Joey, you know? Even though I wasn't the biggest Josh Allen fan, you put a quarterback with his arm and deep ball ability with a speedy receiver like Harry, that is a dangerous combination. If they can get the same page.
It is a great combination. It's just, Josh Allen.
Yeah, if Josh Allen can make the right reads and grow and mature, that can be a lethal combination. That could be what keeps Josh Allen from becoming a bust. Harry could be his bailout plan.
Yeah, and Allen was wrong. We all knew Allen was wrong. Allen needed to sit. A.J. McCarron gets his ass pounded, is out for the year. Josh Allen ain't sitting. Josh Allen ain't playing well. So, at this point, I'm not sure what good Harry would do for him, but it would give him another weapon.
And I feel like Allen's more of a vertical quarterback that likes to air it rather than a balanced QB or a West Coast QB like Baker Mayfield or a Baker Mayfield can be vertical, but he's spontaneous about it. And that's why Baker's having early success in the NFL, while Josh Allen, Sam Darnold are going through growing pains. Same with Josh Rosen, but yeah, they're going through growing pains. But what about Dylan Mitchell and Anthony Johnson? I know you've talked about Johnson a lot really quickly, so if you don't want to mention him again because we have other receivers to get through on these rankings, I get that. But have you studied Mitchell a little bit more, or do you want to get to his round 2 receivers? Do you think Mitchell goes back to school? Quick thoughts on him before we get to the round 2 guys.
Yeah, I think he goes back to school, but, I mean, in this day and age, that's a crapshoot. So, I mean, let's get on to the next guys. And
yeah, because we agree these are the 3 definitive first-round guys if they declare it. If Mitchell goes back, there's 2 first-round guys, and there's a huge drop-off in wide receiver 3. And the 4th guy on this list, A.J. Brown out of Ole Miss, I think he's going to bust. But he ran a 4.5 40. I know he had 85 receptions, 1320 yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns, but you have to look past the stats. The stats are about as misleading as Donald Trump's approval rating because he struggled on tape versus Trevon Diggs and Greedy Williams. So if you're having 85 receptions and you struggle on tape versus 2 SEC corners that are projected to go in the top 15, that means your stats are about as misleading as the president's approval rating. That being said, A.J. Brown is a possession receiver. He can catch up to 10 balls a game. He's a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school. In fact, he turned down Alabama to go to Ole Miss. True story. I read some high school recruiting info on A.J. Brown. Nick Saban recruited him to Alabama and even compared him to Julio Jones. Nick Saban thought that highly of A.J. Brown, but A.J. Brown decided to stay in state and play Ole Miss instead of going to Alabama to play with Calvin Ridley. So he decided to stay in state and be loyal to Mississippi. And I applaud him for that. That really takes a lot of guts. At the same time, his route tree has not grown. He struggled versus corners that press him, and he has not corrected that. It's his 3rd year, and he's 6'1", 220, and honestly, he looks like a poor man's Laquan Treadwell. And that if I'm watching his tape versus Alabama and I see a poor man's Laquan Treadwell, that is not good for his draft stock. Because if it's that obvious that the casual fan can see a poor man's Laquan Treadwell, that means he might fall out of the 1st round. I know some people are going to keep mocking him in the 1st round because he went to the SEC. ESPN will keep mocking him in the 1st round. Bleacher Report will keep mocking him in the 1st round. Walter Football will keep mocking him in the 1st round. Colin Cowherd will keep mocking him in the 1st round because he's in an SEC program. However, his tape screams 2nd-round talent. He's still good enough to be a number 2 complimentary guy, and you can ease him into a lineup as a number 2 guy, but he is not the number 1 receiver Nick Saban hyped him up to be coming out of high school in terms of decision-making, because why did you turn down – I mean, I can't harp on the kid for turning down Alabama to go to Ole Miss, but that looks like a really foolish decision in hindsight looking back on things. Plus his route tree is awful. If he'd gone to Alabama, he would have corrected that. So, I mean, he can be good. I don't think he'll bust, but I don't think he'll be a great Pro Bowler either. I think he can be a solid starter, a nice complimentary piece, but I don't think he's going to be that number 1 receiver that the media's hyping him up to be. I mean, I thought highly of Treadwell too, and then as the draft process evolved, I realized he was going to be a bust, and that's what I'm seeing with A.J. Brown all over again. I like him. He's talented, but all his big games are against mediocre corners. And A.J. Brown, the Ole Miss receiver, he turned down Alabama to go to Ole Miss, and I went on a rant about that. But
yeah, well, I actually really like A.J.
Tell me what you like about him.
He has a chance to be a star, but as you said, I mean, look at the talent that he was playing. When you're playing talent that mediocre, I mean, that's you have to look, as a scout, you have to look really hard to see just what type of receiver you would be getting. But I think he has a chance to be a star.
I do too. He was a 5-star recruit in high school. So that means he's had star power written on him. And if Nick Saban compared him to Julio Jones, he's gifted. But he's got to put everything together. He's got to correct his route tree and get better at reacting and press coverage, and he's really got to put the work in. I'm not saying he can't do it. He just hasn't shown it yet. If he was a 5-star recruit in high school, he's got the ceiling to be an NFL starter if he applies himself and aces the draft process. And really is a chance to emerge into a star. Like, if his combine is better than we think it's going to be, he'll be back in the round 1 conversation, period. And
yeah, if he runs a 4.4, he'll be back in the mid to high first round conversation easy.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, if Dylan Mitchell goes back, A.J. Brown could get pushed up into the late first round, even with a mediocre combine, kind of like Laquan Treadwell. So he's not out of the first round. He's just in the first round friend zone as a fringe second rounder at the moment. But let's get to David Sills, the 5th out of West Virginia. West Virginia receiver, 6'4", 210 pounds. He's a former quarterback turned receiver, just like Julian Edelman, but he's bigger than Edelman. He's got 61 receptions, 896 receiving yards, and 15 receiving touchdowns, 18 receiving touchdowns the last 2 years. He balled out versus Texas, but most of his completions were when Texas cornerback Chris Boyd wasn't covering him. And his signature game came as Tennessee. Tyler, also known as Diluted Yinzer, posted tape of Sills and with a win over West Virginia. And he can be a physical receiver at times. He possesses a remarkable first step. The jumping, the blocking is there. He knows how to use street routes to pickpocket corners that play zone coverage. The weakness with him is he drops a lot of easy passes. He drops a lot of off-target throws as well. His route tree is okay, not great, and that's due to the scheme he's in. He is in a scheme-dependent offense. Like, you could argue that he's a West Coast scheme receiver. David Sills is an intermediate route, short route kind of guy, which makes him a great fit for New England. I mean, Oakland, San Francisco, the Colts, the Texans, but if he's scheme dependent, like if N'Keal Harry's scheme dependent on a deep vertical offense, this guy's scheme dependent on a medium intermediate offense. And the Patriots are a team that utilize a lot of medium offensive concepts. And with Edelman, with Josh Gordon as the starters next year, Hogan, Dorsett, Patterson, free agents, and you got Edelman, Gordon, free agents, you could ease David Sills into that New England lineup, and you can get him in day 2 of the draft, into round 2 or round 3, depending on his 40 time, and you can wait for a receiver. And you don't even have to get David Sills. You can get one of the other guys if you like them more, because this guy, he's a senior. He'll probably play in the Senior Bowl, and he does have some talent. He was Will Greer's #1 target for a reason, and he had 33 touchdowns in the last 2 years at West Virginia with Will Greer as his quarterback. He has talent, but he's basically a poor man's Cooper Kupp. That's basically what you're getting on tape, is a poor man's Cooper Kupp, but he's talented, and he's played better competition than Cooper Kupp. So I think for that reason, he could get pushed up the boards, considering he's the clear-cut #5 guy, in my opinion, after A.J. Brown. But then after that, it's basically a competition to see who wide receiver 6 is. It's a wide-open competition. You got a bunch of round 3 guys jockeying for position. But tell me about David Sills before we get to some of these other guys that could be risers with strong combines and Senior Bowls.
Yeah, Sills is a guy I've just recently started paying attention to, so I really don't have a lot on him. From what I've seen, he's a pretty good route runner. He's really solid overall for us. Pretty good route runner, pretty good speed. He seems to me early on, from what little I've watched, that he'd be one of these guys that would come in and probably be a pretty good slot receiver. Get in these spots, turn it up when need to, not make many mistakes, run pretty good routes, so on and so forth. More like an Edelman type.
Yep. And then we get to the round 3 guys. And I do think David Sills is a good scheme fit for the Patriots. But Colin Johnson out of Texas is a big body target for the Texas Longhorns. 65 receptions, 947 yards, 7 touchdowns. I know his numbers are underperforming, but he plays the Georgia Bulldogs in the Sugar Bowl. So if he has a signature game versus DeAndre Baker, he could surge up the boards. And he posted some tape versus USC. There were some impressive qualities. The deadly speeds there. His route running is amazing. Sharp, crisp routes. He displays a lot of good route running. I've seen him run up to 29 routes. He has pretty much every route except the wheel route, and he can leap into the air. He can make spectacular catches, capable of catching without using his body. I mean, he catches the ball when it comes his way, generates separation with ease, and very difficult to tackle. Will open up the running game by blocking, utilize on special teams the length, the eye-hand coordination. His quarterback, Sam Ehlinger, thinks Johnson will be a Hall of Fame receiver. Ken LeBlanc also has him as wide receiver 1 in this draft. Knows how to win in press coverage, can swipe his hands away, great body control. There were people that had this guy as number 1 receiver back in the preseason. He stems more than you want, and he has a tendency to drop passes on tape. Plus, he struggles in double coverage. I have a 3rd-round grade on Colin Johnson. There's some people like his teammate Little John Humphrey more. Like Johnson entered the year as number 1 guy, but more people are growing towards Little John Humphrey. And we'll see. I know Little John Humphrey. There's a Texas receiver named after the rapper Little John, but Colin Johnson is the feature guy on the Texas Longhorns offense. And I think he's going to make a solid complementary receiver in the NFL. I'm not sure he can be a feature guy, but I know he can be a complementary guy.
Former Indian center fielder Barry Zoe, the American League's first black player. You will get the first goal. Don't forget the only plays in your pick already been live after every round game, including today's game. The official post-game show on the radio.
All right, Denzel Mims, 3.208, 49 receptions, 699 yards, 8 touchdowns. Mims could be one of the steals. Possesses ideal size. Runs short routes effectively. Mims, he can perform streaks. He's got 12 different routes. Mims has soft hands. I know we talked about Denzel Mims the other day. I messaged Mark Jarvis from What's On Draft NFL about Denzel Mims, why he had him as the number 1 receiver in the class, and he said his catch radius is like a 3-car garage. I love the analogy. I never heard that before from a scout, but I love the analogy. His catch radius is like a 3-car garage. That's so random. It's like, why didn't I think of that? And I got to give Mark credit for that. So check out his site. And Denzel Mims has a lot of speed and athleticism on tape. But we see these Baylor receivers. Josh Gordon's really the only Baylor receiver that made it. Like, a lot of Baylor receivers get hyped up on the boards each year, but there hasn't been a receiver outside of Josh Gordon who's made it, even though a lot of guys like Kendall Wright or Corey Coleman, they get pushed up the boards every year. So that's my concern, because his numbers dropped without Anu Solomon at quarterback, but he is talented. But I guess we're going to mention the 3rd Big 12 receiver, and then I'll let Joey assess these guys again, because the 3rd Big 12 receiver, Marquez Brown, might be Joey's favorite of the bunch between Colin Johnson and Denzel Mims, because Marquez Brown, he's projected to run a 4.27 40 time. That's what he ran in the spring before the start of the season. And he was Kyler Murray's biggest target and go-to guy during the Heisman campaign. So if he runs a 4.27, he's going to get pushed up and someone's going to overdraft him. That doesn't mean he's a first-round talent. It means he'll get overdrafted like John Ross, because this guy's a better route runner than John Ross. He's not as fast as John Ross, but he can run a 4.2 40, high 4.27. And if he does that and he's got much better route running than John Ross, he might even be the first receiver pick. That's how, because he can run all the routes. Like, he's got the it factor. He's got the route tree that John Ross lacked. And he's a little bit bigger than John Ross. The only route he doesn't know is the wheel route, but he struggled to react when Baker Mayfield threw him a pass versus Oklahoma State. I think his reaction timing when attempting to catch the football is going to get better, but Marquez Brown was a freshman redshirt last year. Now he's a sophomore redshirt. And he's going to declare for the 2019 NFL draft despite being a sophomore redshirt. And Tony Mario's had a first-round grade on this guy since August. He's been telling us to keep an eye on him. I didn't think he'd declare, but Tony Mario had this guy on his draft board as early as August. So I got to give Tony credit for that. And Marquez Brown could be a riser. Like, he actually found a riser right when Charlie Campbell finds the risers, and he might be right about Marquez Brown. If he runs a 4.27, he could get pushed up into the top 15 or even the top 10 like John Ross. I don't know if he'll get picked as high as Ross, but we've seen crazier things happen in the NFL draft process. So take me through these three Big 12 guys. Who is your favorite between Colin Johnson, Denzel Mims, and Marquez Brown, and why? Which one of these guys is on your radar?
Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of any of them. I guess I'd say Brown because he has more upside. Mate, no, I think it's Brown because he has more upside. That's about all I got. Because Big 12 receivers, how many of them actually learn what the routes they need to learn to be successful? Out of a percentage, I'd say 35-40%. I mean, and there are a lot of Big 12 receivers that get drafted and signed as undrafted free agents. So I'm not incredibly high on any of them, but if you're looking at potential, I'd say Brown.
Kelvin Harmon, North Carolina State receiver, and Jalen Smith, the Louisville receiver. Kelvin Harmon had another big season with Ryan Finley at quarterback, and he's got that alpha mindset to go after the ball, track it, attack the defender. His vertical push allows him to get separation. He can make adjustments on the fly, which allow him to catch the football. Like, he'll have back-to-back seasons of 1,000 yards. He does not have elite speed, and he struggles with yards after the catch. I know Joe Marino pointed this out when I was reading his write-up on the Draft Network, but Mark mentioned how he lacks speed, Mark Suba, so I'm looking at what everyone's saying about Kelvin Harmon. But Thomas kept raving about him. Thomas Coburn from our podcast kept raving about Kelvin Harmon. He has to show more explosiveness, and he is not at a 10 receiving touchdowns. He's got the route tree down, and he's got that mindset, but he has things he needs to work on. Even his route tree needs some work. So, I mean, he's got some stuff he's got to work on. He's talented. He's going to be in the Senior Bowl. He'll have a chance to correct this. I like him as a project. He's way more productive than Jalen Smith, who had 36 receptions, 550 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown without Lamar Jackson. When you go from Louisville receiver with DirecTV with Lamar Jackson to Louisville receiver with cable without Lamar Jackson, that says a lot about your receiver and how you relied on Lamar Jackson to be your quarterback, but that also says a lot about how good Lamar Jackson is, considering he's 3-0 at the Ravens. But, I mean, I like Kelvin Harmon more than Jalen Smith. They're both ACC receivers, but I do like Kelvin Harmon more in terms of ability.
Yeah, Harmon is, I mean, he's more talented, but like you said, got to work on his release. If you cannot get off the line, you cannot play in the NFL. They will jam you, and you'll be completely useless.
Number 11, Hakeem Butler out of Iowa State. 6'6", 225. He's a big body. 51 receptions, 126 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns. And the thing with Hakeem Butler is we have people debating whether he's better than Alan Lazard. And I know Keelan Dyer actually did this SWAT report for me. He called it a Wednesday show. He actually did this report for me while I was watching the College Cup. So I'll give him some credit, and I'll mention his show. But one of the things I'm looking at here is with Hakeem Butler, good size, speed, his route tree. He struggles with his ability showing stiff hips on film. There are things he needs to work on. There's major concerns, how he projects other number one target, but I don't see any concerns with Hakeem Butler as terms of threats. But the upside to be a number one target is there, according to Keelan. He likes him more than Lazard, and so does David Koning, who's a huge Iowa Hawkeyes fan, scouting college football. Nick Kendall, who is also a huge Hawkeyes fan, who writes for Mile High Huddle, also another big fan of Hakeem Butler. So Hakeem Butler's got some advocates. It's like last year we had Mark Suba, Thomas Coburn, and Ryan Romero all agree on Lazard. And this year, all the other Iowa State fans who have more credentials in the media are backing Hakeem Butler. So it's an interesting debate. And Lazard did not get drafted, so you can argue Hakeem Butler is better for that reason. But I feel like he's very similar compared to Lazard. But they have their differences.
I wasn't a huge fan of Lazard. I know you were through the roof with him.
Like most of our staff was through the roof with him last year. But speaking for yourself.
I'm looking at, God, his name just slipped my head. The guy you were just talking about. Like, the big dude. Chris?
Yeah. Al Lazard?
Yeah, no.
Hakeem Butler.
His teammate.
Hakeem Butler.
Butler, yes. I don't know. Start talking, said Lazard, and the other name just slipped my mind. Yeah, but I was looking at him, and I love the big body. I love how he I think he's the type of guy, Kelvin Benjamin type, but just don't eat your way out of the NFL. Are you there, Chris?
Yeah. Takedown Scouting Podcast is what Keelan also contributes to, and he wrote the report on Hakeem Butler. So I do like Hakeem Butler more than Lazard after listening to you and most of the people break him down. But the next receiver out of South Carolina is a guy who may end up in the first round, Deebo Samuel. Jason Bannell and Josiah Ray are raving about him, and it's obvious why. He had a signature game versus Clemson, 10 receptions, 210 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. And when you have and if Clemson wins the college football playoff, Deebo Samuel will, and that'll be an argument teams will make. Like Deebo Samuel, he had 210 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns versus the national champions. That will reinforce why he's one of the top receivers in the class. I'm not as high on him as I was on Alshon Jeffery, but he's much faster. He can run a 4.36 40 time. And if he runs that 40 time, it's a faster 40 time than N'Keal Harry, and he can run the routes that Anthony Johnson runs, he may end up surpassing Anthony Johnson. I mean, he can catch without using his body. He's lined up everywhere. Doesn't have very many weaknesses. His one weakness is with a lack of route tree. He corrected that in 2018. Deebo Samuel is a wide receiver with a third-round grade. Got invited to the 2019 Senior Bowl, and he's got injured in the past. Durability is a slight concern I have with Samuel. So I really like Deebo Samuel. What's your impression on him?
I mean, get down to him here.
Oh.
Let's pull up your receiver rankings.
Yeah, I'm going to keep, like, what I do is I try to read through the rankings. Sometimes I'll scroll down, but I'm scrolling back up to number 12 and Deebo Samuel.
South Carolina. I really, yeah, because I'm terrible with names, so I can barely keep track of anybody with names. I actually really like Samuel. I think he could very well end up being a number 1 wide receiver. 6 foot tall, 210. I mean, he's got a nice body. He's got a lot of speed, and I think he'd be especially good if they were able to get him in a position where he can run in the slot position, or he reminds me a little bit of Golden Tate. Let's put it that way. The big question I have with that comparison, though, would be, with Tate's really aggressive, and I don't know if Samuel can be as aggressive. But as far as their game goes, they seem an awful lot alike. And if the team's looking for an all-around good receiver who can get them a lot of yards in a hurry, I mean, Samuel is probably it. Another receiver that he compared to would be Jacksonville's Dede Westbrook.
DK Metcalf, 6'4", 230, 26 receptions, 569 yards. He is a lot faster than A.J. Brown, and he runs streak routes and deep routes. He's bigger than Brown. He's more explosive, and a lot of people He's more explosive than Treadwell, and he's bigger at 6'4", 230. And a lot of people are huge fans of DK Metcalf. Even though he's a sophomore redshirt, even though he got put on IR, I've seen DK Metcalf atop a lot of rankings, a lot of draft rankings, have him as the top receiver in the entire draft. So he wasn't the feature guy like A.J. Brown at Ole Miss, but he's a sophomore redshirt. I only watched a brief glimpse of him versus Alabama. Yet, what are your thoughts on DK Metcalf out of Ole Miss as the Arizona State receiver? And then there's DeMarcus Lodge, who's a senior, but he hasn't really gotten an invite to anything. So I'm up in the air on his stock, and he's basically a fill-in player when Metcalf got injured. So I feel like he's a slot receiver. I feel like Lodge is just a third fiddle to Metcalf and A.J. Brown, but what are your thoughts on these Ole Miss receivers before we get to number 15?
Metcalf isn't bad, but I don't see the hype as much as I do. And other guys, I don't see the skills that I do in the guys in front of him. So I do think he'd be a great red zone target with his big body. And it'd be a pretty good downfield threat because of his speed. So, I mean, third or fourth round's probably a pretty good place for him. I don't really have an opinion on the other two guys.
Yeah. Andy Isabella, Massachusetts. Andy Isabella from Massachusetts. This guy's a fantastic slot receiver. He had 102 receptions this season, and he had 219 receiving yards against the Georgia Bulldogs in the season finale for UMass. He could be a day 2 pick. Like, Andy Isabella has the route tree locked down, just like Deebo Samuel, Anthony Johnson, Jalen Smith. He can catch with his body. He got 100 receptions. He's one of the only receivers in this draft to have 100 receptions, but he's undersized. I'm not sure his speed's going to translate, but he accepted an invite to Mobile, and I saw his tape on the Senior Bowl show on Wednesday. They did a Senior Bowl show every Wednesday on Yahoo Sports at 5 p.m. Eastern. They have a Senior Bowl preview show where Jim Nagy breaks down the guys that are going to be in the Senior Bowl. And I saw the highlights of Andy Isabella at UMass, and I was blown away by what I saw. And I really like this guy. I think he can be a solid slot guy, and he's a guy you might even be able to get on the third day of the draft, in the 4th round, get a steal with him, and get a player who provides much better value than a 4th round talent, but drops to the 4th round due to how strong the competition in this class is. Like, he's a day 3 guy I can see being a steal.
Well, you have to remember, a lot of the most successful wide receivers in the NFL aren't huge stars. Slot receivers who get first downs, who make all the routes, make all the catches, and they just sit down, 10-yard gains, make a first down, move the chains, and they get 5, 6, 7 catches a game. And that's somebody that he has the potential to be.
Yep. And next up, we have Tyree Brady out of Marshall. This guy can catch in double coverage, unlike Aaron Dobson, but he's not as fast as Aaron Dobson was. He's not as productive as far as the tape goes. And Aaron Dobson was drafted in the 3rd round, yet he had a very horrific career with the New England Patriots. And Tyree Brady could be a poor man's Aaron Dobson, but he catches the ball in double coverage, unlike Dobson. I think he could be a borderline starter. I just see boom or bust, but I see a solid slot guy. Nothing spectacular, nothing great, but could be a good, effective slot guy in the right system. And it's up in the air with him. I think there's other receivers in this class that are borderline starters that could be better, but Tyree Brady has the ability to catch in double coverage and gain that separation and do some good things on tape. What are your thoughts on him before we get to the next receiver who really intrigues me? He might be the most intriguing receiver in this class because he doesn't have an invite to any of the All-Star games yet. Yet he's a son of a former Pro Bowl receiver, former first-round pick.
Well, the thing that stands up to me about Tyree Brady is huge body. Okay. 6'3", 208. Like, well, not huge as far as muscular goes, but the height, the wingspan, and everything. That is going to be a huge issue for pretty much any corner. 66 receptions, 914 yards. I mean, that is that's pretty telling that he has been giving people some problems. I'd like to see what he runs at the combine, and if he can keep it down into a high 4.9 or low 5. Oh.
Yep. Stanley Morgan Jr., Nebraska. did well despite their losing record. Stanley Morgan Jr. had 70 receptions, 1,004 receiving yards, 7 receiving touchdowns. His biggest game came against weak opponents, but he torched Josh Jackson for Iowa last year. And he's also the son of former Patriots receiver Stanley Morgan. And he can run a 4.48. He can run 30 different routes. He did better without Tanner Lee at quarterback. So there's a lot I like, but he does very well against corners who play in zone. He also lacks the strength and physical ability to separate himself from corners who play man and press and lock him down. Like Ohio State was able to blanket this guy last year without putting Denzel Ward on him. And that's why I see this guy as a borderline starter. He will be effective, but he's not going to be someone who dominates the league for 13 years and is a 4-time Pro Bowler like his father. And he may end up playing in the Senior Bowl, but if he does, he's another guy that could surge up the boards. My biggest threat is he has the attitude. He's faster than his dad, but he doesn't have the route trees. Well, he does have the route tree. My biggest concern is actually the point that he has not received an invite to his Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine Game, or the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl. I checked out Mark Jarvis's database yesterday, and I found out he did not have a Senior Bowl, Shrine Game, or Collegiate Bowl invite yet. That means he either hasn't hired an agent and he hasn't taken the initiative to hire an agent, or it means that his agent is awful. And I don't want to get into agent business that is not my business to begin with, but I find it a little bit odd that Stanley Morgan, a receiver with 70 receptions, who's the son of Stanley Morgan, does not have an invite to any of the 3 All-Star games. I find that a little bit odd. I don't know if it's a threat to his draft stock due to the lack of exposure, but a lot of guys who don't get invites to one of those 3 games usually don't get drafted. If you're a senior and you don't get an invite for one of those 3 games, it's usually not a good sign. So I'm a little bit worried about that. I want to dig in deeper. I love his tape. I think he's going to be a steal on day 3. But at the same time, I want to dig in a little deeper and find out why he doesn't have an invite to any of those games. That's a little bit alarming to me if I'm a scout. Like, I noticed that. I see that. It's like, okay, we need to dig a little bit deeper here.
Yeah, it surprises me that he didn't get an invite or hasn't gotten an invite so far to anything, because I think he could be a mid-round 2 pick. And
honestly, if Leigh Steinberg signed this guy, he could be a day 2 pick. Leigh Steinberg could make this guy a top 100 draft pick. Just bring in Stanley Morgan, bring in his son for a business meeting, and sign them, and then he can make this guy a top 100 pick. I really believe that.
Yeah, and it was, yeah, it's really weird that he's not there, because he's actually one of the better overall receivers in the draft, and I think he could be a mid-round 2 pick. For him not to get invites yet is really surprising.
Yeah, like Mark had a first-round grade on this guy in the summer, and even though he's not a first-round guy now, I really like his tape, and his tape speaks for itself, and I think he's really one of the more underrated players. So if he falls to day 3 because of that, he could end up being one of the bigger steals of the draft. And that brings me to the final player that I have a starter grade on, Paris Campbell out of Ohio State, number 18 on my board. This guy was a guy that got hyped up as a first-rounder prior to the start of 2017, but they only had 13 career receptions. I know Charlie Campbell loved this guy last year, but I felt like he wasn't ready yet. He needed another year. So he went back, and he had a big game versus Michigan. 6 receptions, 192 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Campbell was Dwayne Haskins' go-to guy at Ohio State, 2018.
You talk about Paris, Ohio State.
Yeah.
He is one of those guys that I like his aggressiveness. I like his overall body type. And quite frankly, I think he would do well with a team like Jacksonville or a team who tries to establish the power running game. I think that would probably be his best area because he'd be able to block for the running back. He'd be able to get in closer and on those bunch formations, be able to work in the slot and do all those little things that a lot of wide receivers have trouble with. Because he reminds me of one of those guys who's just kind of a do-it-all receiver. He's not flashy. He's not going to make big plays. He's not going to do all this other stuff. But he's going to make you a better team when you draft him.
Travis Fulgham. Yeah, and Paris Campbell's effective, but after that, there's a drop-off between receiver 18 to 19, and the drop-off gets worse. Like Travis Fulgham, I saw his tape versus Virginia Tech. He dropped a lot of passes. He can pick up cornerbacks. He had a signature game against Virginia Tech and Old Dominion's upset, but his eye-hand coordination sucked. I really don't see a future starter with him. And the next guy, Jalen Hurd, who's number 20 on these rankings, he was a former running back at Tennessee, and he's moved to receiver. He runs like a cheetah. He needs to add more muscle and improve his route tree. Jim Nagy discussed how Jalen Hurd's route tree in the Senior Bowl needs work. He's a day 3 pick. I've got a 5th-round grade on him. He was once a running back who exceeded 1,000 rushing yards at Tennessee. Then he transferred to Baylor and switched positions and became a receiver.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the other guys on your list, so you just go on ahead.
Yeah, like Hunter Renfrow, I called Hunter Renfrow Clemson's version of Rudy. And that's ironic because they're playing Notre Dame in the college football playoff. And if I call Hunter Renfrow Clemson's version of Rudy, then Notre Dame's going to want to deck him when we get to the college football playoff. Because Rudy is Notre Dame's thing. But Hunter Renfrow's Rudy of Clemson because he caught the 2 game-winning touchdowns to beat Alabama. He's small. He's lanky. He plays with more heart than anyone on that roster. Like, he's not an NFL guy, but for a college receiver, he plays with heart, kind of like Rudy. So, Hunter Renfrow, he's Clemson's version of Rudy. Get over it, Notre Dame. And if you want to shut me up, just beat Clemson in the college football playoff. Then we've got Jazz Ferguson out of Nicholls State. This is the only receiver that got dismissed or suspended out of the entire 25 in the rankings. We've only found one receiver with any off-the-field concerns or baggage, and that was Jazz Ferguson, an LSU receiver who failed a drug test. But he was the only receiver out of the 25 who failed a drug test. So this receiver class is character-driven, to say the least. But there's always slip-ups leading up to the NFL draft. There's always a slip-up. One of these guys does something dumb. They get a DUI, or they don't order an Uber, or they do something stupid, or they're accused of assault. They do something really stupid, and it kills their draft stock. It happens every other year, and we want it to go away, but I'm just surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised that the receivers are this clean this year, but it's a pleasant surprise. It's good. It shows these guys are disciplined and they're really taking their training seriously. I mean, Alex Wesley out of Northern Colorado, deadly speed, catches the ball in traffic. He works his way to the starting lineup despite being 5th on the depth chart, has an outstanding work ethic that coaches at Colorado rave about, struggles when corners play man and press on him, develop more short and medium routes. We see more jump balls. We want to see him make some spectacular catches.
Yeah, and I think that for this group down in the bottom half that you're looking at now, that you really do have to look at work ethic more than anything else. So, I mean, that can only bode really well for him.
Yep, and that's the thing, his work ethic with Wesley. And then you got Emmanuel Hall, who had one big game versus Wyoming, but he was the number 2 guy at Missouri last year. Then he became the number 1 guy this year. He's going through some transitions, so I see him as a borderline late round pick. And then you got Anthony Ratliff Williams. He's an underclassman and someone who I really like as a late threat. But every year we have a guy who probably should have go back to school, but they end up declaring, and you're asking yourself, why the heck did this kid declare? And that's sort of how I feel about Anthony Ratliff Williams. He only had 6 receiving touchdowns, 42 receptions. I feel like he could use another year, but he went to a draft. And the funny thing is he's a former dual threat quarterback, so he's got the speed to get separation. So if he has a good 40 time, who knows, maybe his stock improves. But overall, I like this class a lot more than last year's class because I feel like there's more variety, more potential starters. Last year, I thought there were 16 potential starters. This year, I feel like there's 18. And I feel like the top 3 guys, Mitchell, Johnson, and Harry, are better than anyone in last year's draft. Like, I feel that strongly about their tape this season, but we'll see what happens. That will do it for the receivers edition of our podcast. And we're going to get to some picks, and then I'll break down the rest of the show and break down the news that happened, the Heisman, Kyler Murray, the Jaguars QB situation, why they're going to draft a QB, and I'm going to talk about some soccer at the end, but we're going to get all the football out of the way so Joey can focus on what he needs to do for work, because I know Joey gets really bored when I talk about soccer, so we're just going to knock out all the football content. And if you guys want to listen to the rest of the show, go to talkshoe.com.
Everybody gets bored when you talk about soccer.
I do it because I love it, though. I don't care if people yawn. I don't even care if someone who went to Maryland, who shall remain nameless, drinks a beer while I talk about soccer, because you're just going to drink the beer with them. You're like, and that's your right as an American. So I'm not going to fight you on that. That's a fight I will not win.